Man, oh man, what a ride this has been. My anticipation leading into this game was an insane roller coaster. From the day the game was announced back in December 2016 until the day before the game's story leaked, The Last of Us Part 2 was not only my most anticipated game of all time, but quite possibly my most anticipated form of entertainment, movie, or game in my entire life. The very first Last of Us is in my top 2 favorite games of all time, which I know sounds a little bit goofy, but I've always had an endless debate in my mind between that game and another game by Naughty Dog, Uncharted 4. But like I said, I could not wait to get back into this story that Naughty Dog crafted back in 2013. But when those leaks hit the internet, my hype lowered a bit. I was surprised at what I was seeing and reading, all of these risks they were taking with the story. I was honestly beginning to feel worried. A lot of what leaked caused immense backlash, lots of fans began to refuse purchasing the game, and the hate that the company and developers received brought my hype to an all-time low with this game. I was still going to play it no matter what, and I was still looking forward to it nonetheless, but when the entire fanbase turns on something and you feel like you're one of the only people still remaining hopeful, it's hard not to start getting less and less excited for something. This is the same feeling I felt recently with the Disney Star Wars films. But now I can finally let to rest all of the online negativity and finally give my own thoughts on this game after having completed it nearly 20 hours later. There's a lot to process after the credits roll. Typically, when it comes to movies, I may come out with a certain feeling, but upon rewatching it, like the film less than I did initially, possibly due to overexposure, and other times, very rarely, will I end up enjoying something more. With games, on the other hand, I tend to have a far better idea as to what I think. This is most likely because you're spending far longer lengths of time with the game's story, characters, and gameplay, so you know where you sit on it for the most part. After completing the first Last of Us back in 2013, I knew I had experienced a masterpiece, a game I would cherish forever and call one of my all-time favorites. With The Last of Us Part 2, my thoughts are far less clear. I know I enjoyed the game for many reasons, but I also know that this was not at all what I expected back in 2016, or what I honestly would have ever wanted, but that's not to say that I hate the decisions Naughty Dog made with The Last of Us Part 2. They could have made this a very straightforward and safe sequel that expands on a few areas such as gameplay and further explores the characters, similar to the Uncharted games, but instead, Naughty Dog decided to take a route a lot more bold, full of risks, twists, turns, and drowning in emotion. I really can't dive too much into the story of The Last of Us Part 2, as the game's story contains so many spoilers and it throws you immediately into the action. All I'll say is that The Last of Us Part 2 is a game about revenge. It's a character study on how far people are willing to go to exact justice on those who have wronged them, and what the consequences of pursuing this endless cycle of violence and revenge can hold. It's a game filled with raw emotion. It's not hopeful like the first game. Marlene, the leader of the Fireflies, once said in the predecessor that when you're lost in the darkness, look for the light. This game completely immerses Ellie and the surrounding characters in the dark, with no ray of light in sight. That's not to say that there aren't any smaller character moments, but they're fewer and farther between than in the first. Ellie has changed since the first game. She is now 19, living in Jackson, the settlement that Tommy, Joel's brother, lives in at the end of the first game. The town is filled with families, people with children, and besides a few minor hiccups, life is peaceful. She's growing up, living in a world with no cure, something that has affected her ever since the end of the first game. She begins to fall in love with a girl named Dina, but things quickly change after a turn of events, and you are thrown immediately into its story. Ellie snaps. She changes as a person, becoming far more violent and losing almost all of her fun and childish antics from the first game. The characters joining you on your quest are mostly the same. At first, they might seem like beacons of hope, but Ellie's quest for revenge and changing character causes them to doubt her actions. For me personally, some of the new characters were one note. I found them to be one of the weaker aspects of the game. I was excited to be joined by new fresh faces like Dina and Jesse, but I felt that due to the way the game is told, as well as a major shift in the story halfway through, that these characters were left feeling underdeveloped, and without enough qualities to make them stand out. I felt this way especially with the character of Jessie. All of this being said though, I have to give props to the amazing cast. Ashley Johnson especially portrays a damaged Ellie with so much emotion. Her performance was one of the best, if not the best I've ever seen in the game. The rest of the cast is very strong as well. I love the scenes you spend with Joel, developing their relationship and filling in the blanks between the two games. Seeing how well everyone can perform in a game makes me wonder how good these actors would be if they were featured in full-length films. I did find there were some moments where characters would make certain decisions that I found to be off, going against what had previously been established with them. As I said, this is a non-spoiler review, so it's hard for me to really dive into anything related to the second half of the game. I found that the second half, well, it took a while to get used to, and definitely had weaker characters that I didn't care for, is what makes the game's story work as much as it does in the end. Although, I left feeling the ending was perhaps a bit rushed. Gameplay in The Last of Us Part 2 is in similar style to the first games, but with a few new and welcomed additions. Combat is incredibly brutal, yet satisfying. Enemies now have names. When you kill one, their name will be called out in horror by someone who once knew them. Same with dogs. If you kill the owners first, a dog is left whimpering and nudging the corpse of its fallen friend, making you feel bad. Shooting an enemy at point-blank range with a shotgun won't always kill them immediately. Sometimes their arm may explode, causing them to drop to their knees, screaming in pain as blood pours out of their stump, and their friends scurry over to investigate what has happened. Enemies are much smarter now as well, flanking you from behind and taking you off guard. There's now a dodging mechanic implemented into combat, so you can now swiftly duck and slide to avoid melee attacks before plunging your machete into your enemy's skull. You can slide through cracks in walls or crawl under trucks and cars to avoid enemies, but they may end up investigating, pulling you out and making you vulnerable once again.
Gotcha! Get up, coward!
Combat in The Last of Us Part 2 felt heavily improved to me. The enemies were more dangerous overall, and I always felt like I was on edge, moving around the map, trying to scrounge up more ammo so I could finish the enemies off. Other times, I would have to run for it and find a way to escape combat, or perhaps make my way out and then go back in with the stealth approach instead. The game includes a fair share of set pieces as well, most occurring in the second half. These made the game even more exciting. I found the sequel to be far more terrifying than the first as well. Infected have been improved a ton here. Runners now stick together in massive hordes, stalkers will run away during combat and jump on you out of nowhere, bloaters can now charge through walls, and then there's the new additions, such as the Shamblers, who aren't tough to take down, but if they get close enough, will shoot out clouds of acidic gas, burning you. Traversal also seems some nice improvements. Unlike the first, you can now jump. It might not sound like much for a game in 2020, but it does make exploring the game a lot more fun. You can throw ropes over areas and use them to swing to an undiscovered section of the map. There's now locked safes instead of shiv doors, where you'll have to scan your environment for clues on what the code is. A lot of basic elements from the first game carry over here as well. You'll still need to open cupboards and drawers in order to find crafting materials so you can create a variety of things. You also need to look for parts so that you can make upgrades to your weapons, and pills so you can upgrade Ellie's traits. In this game, however, Ellie learns these new skills through survival magazines, which will unlock new branches of upgrades. The controls for riding your horse feel improved in this game quite a bit. A big part of this is due to the fact that certain areas are open, so you don't feel boxed in while on a horse like you did in the first. You can also make your way through Seattle in this game by boat, which is one of my favorite sections of the game's story. The game also gives you complete control over the difficulty. Say you want the enemy AI to be very intelligent and difficult, but you still want to have lots of health and be able to find ammo more often, well, you can do that by setting different categories to different levels. The inclusion of this does sadly remove the presence of trophies for completing the game on separate difficulties, but it's great to be able to completely customize these different aspects, catering to how you want to play The Last of Us Part 2. Everything in this game feels like it's branching off of what the first one already introduced, and it does it in excellent fashion. Plus, you can always have a ton of fun with those guitar segments. The Last of Us Part 2 looks incredible. If there's one thing you can always expect from a Naughty Dog game, it's the fact that they always continue to push the envelope further as to what games can do. It's especially noteworthy considering this is a release at the end of the PS4's cycle. Never before in a game have I seen animation this good. Facial expressions and motion capture create near lifelike qualities and movements, further boasted by the cast's stellar work. Even out of cutscenes and when in gameplay, this smooth, lifelike look is still present due to Naughty Dog's stellar work. Character models look lifelike with faces that look real, little details like light lighting up someone's eyes or shining through ears all make this feel incredibly realistic as possible on the PS4. Continuing with in-game character models, the infected look amazing in this game. The level of detail is so high that certain classes such as the new Shamblers look genuinely disgusting with all of their pus and fungus. The game is set in Seattle, and the updated engine showcases the post-apocalyptic version of the city in immense detail. Whether it's the large open downtown sections where you stare up at destroyed post-apocalyptic buildings, or drenched muddy forests, or grass-covered suburbs, seeing this modern city taken over by nature after almost 30 years of this virus is, in a way, beautiful. Everything looks stunning, and the game gives you a good amount of control over the HDR with the brightness and contrast adjustments, which is a nice upgrade from previous Naughty Dog games where the only available HDR options were the on and off button. I've also never seen a game with as many accessibility options as The Last of Us Part 2. I mentioned earlier how you can completely change the difficulty, but there's even options for colorblind people, there's modes that remove detail from objects and color certain things like enemies and allies different colors, there's sound hints to direct blind people, and in-game directions for the deaf. These obviously don't mean much to me, but it's nice to see a company put in the work so that anyone can play this game. Sound design is something I don't discuss too often in games, but I feel like it's something worth mentioning here. This was one of the most immersive games for audio, and mind you, this is on a console that sadly does not include Dolby Atmos support. When in large foresty settings, you may hear whistles in the distance of a religious sect known as the Seraphites, catching you off guard for a split second, making you think it happened outside in real life. Then all of a sudden, an arrow fires into your shoulder at an incredibly loud volume, startling you. Sound design is fantastic. The noise of people's brains splattering on the sidewalk as you fire a silenced pistol into their head. Or the sound of someone gurgling and choking to death on their own blood after you stab them in the throat with a knife. It's lifelike, and that's what makes it horrifying, but equally immersive and impressive. The last category I want to touch on before I give my final thoughts is one that people don't often talk about, but it's something I always find important, and that's the musical score. Like the first, the game is composed by Gustavo Santaolalla. I love the score in the original. It was simple but always effective, and it was also very consistent. The score in Part 2 isn't as memorable, or at least not yet for me, but there are certain moments, especially during cutscenes, where the music would be perfectly used to the point where I'd even get chills sometimes.
Wait, you're gonna go now?
Yeah, we have a lead.
Like, at least just wait for Jessie to rest up.
She could be gone by then.
Ellie.
During combat, the score would help amp up the suspense and intensity, making me even more drawn into the game. Overall, The Last of Us Part 2 is a technical masterpiece. Every aspect of its world is made with passion. The most minute and small details are included to make this world feel real, and the tone of the story is portrayed through the combat, which is more brutal and unforgiving than ever before. The game is filled with countless memorable moments from a set-piece standpoint, but where Part 2 let me down was with the handling of its story. As I said, Naughty Dog makes some bold and interesting decisions that are sure to divide fans, and already have. If you can get past the events that set the story on its way, and when it gets to the halfway point, still push onwards to experience the incredible set pieces present in the second half, as well as witness the story come full circle, then there's a chance the game may work for you like it did for me. I just can't help but feel a little bit disappointed with the game's less strong story. I felt as if there weren't that many great small moments between characters, something that made the first as good as it was. It can be a bit messy at times because of how often it'll fade in and out of black, and I found that there was a lack of development for the new characters, mostly due to reduced screen time because of the game's big shift halfway through. After the big changes finished, however, I was hoping to spend more time getting back into the swing of things, but the game sort of just throws you into its epilogue, which I found to be a bit rushed. For me, the best moments of the story were the ones set in the past, where we would get to play as a young Ellie, doing fun events with Joel that reminded me of the lighthearted and hopeful tone of Left Behind, which seems to have been left behind until the ending, which many fans feel is depressing and devoid of anything good, but for me, there was a glimmer of hope. In the end, I love this game. I know it's divisive and that many fans hate it, and I can understand why, but for me, while it is challenging and poses many questions, it's a game that I won't forget, and I will continue to think about it long after the credits have rolled, and long after its release.